The vibration woke me before the light did. I reached for the phone on the nightstand, still half dreaming of snow candlelight voices. Instead, it was a single message, time-stamped 6:03 a.m. Mom, we canceled lunch. No time today. Going to my mother-in-law's instead. No punctuation, no apology. Just logistics like I was an item to be rescheduled or worse deleted. The house was silent. The kind of stillness you only get on holiday mornings before footsteps fill the halls and coffee brews in shared air. I sat up slowly, letting the silence sink in. Downstairs, everything was already done. The table was set from the night before. White cloth three-place settings, polished forks, and the old mismatched wine glasses Callan always said he liked because they felt like home. The ham was marinating. The pie sat on the counter under foil. I'd even made his favorite stuffing just in case. He used to scoop extra and sneak bites while I carved. I stood in the kitchen, unsure whether to turn off the oven or leave it warm. I didn't text back. I didn't call. Instead, I poured myself a small cup of water, sat in the chair by the window, and watched the sky lighten behind the frost. I waited. Not for them, really. Just for the ache in my chest to pick a direction, explode, or disappear. It did neither. It just lingered, dull and certain. At 8 sharp, I stood, walked upstairs and opened the hallway closet. The suitcase was still where I left it after my last visit to Seaside. I dusted it off with the sleeve of my sweater and placed it on the bed. It didn't take long to pack. 1 coat, 2 sweaters, my folder of papers, and a book I hadn't finished. By the time the zipper closed, I already knew I wouldn't be here for dinner. Not today. Maybe not again. Downstairs, the pie was still cooling. The kitchen still smelled like cinnamon and roasted cloves. I turned off the oven. Then I opened the drawer and took out the envelope labeled Plan B. The taxi arrived at exactly 10 tires crunching lightly on the gravel. I watched it through the front window, the driver checking his phone, then glancing up toward the house. I didn't move right away. I let the clock tick a little longer. The oven had long cooled, though the kitchen still carried the scent of cloves and sugar. I placed the pie still untouched in the fridge. The wrapped gifts, 3 of them each carefully chosen, remained on the sideboard. I didn't unwrap them. I didn't take them with me. They weren't mine anymore. At the door, I paused, looking around one last time. The house felt full of things that once mattered: the crocheted table runner, the photo of Callan at age 12, the scuffed armrest where he used to lean in and ask for extra dessert. None of it felt like mine either. I locked the door behind me. The driver, a young man with a knitted hat and polite eyes, opened the trunk for me. Heading out alone on Christmas, he asked like someone might ask if I was lost. I nodded. Just going where I should have gone years ago. He didn't press further. I appreciated that. In the back seat, I set my bag beside me. 1 coat, 2 sweaters, the folder, the envelope. My old reading glasses still tucked in the side pocket. We pulled away from the curb slowly. No neighbors waved. No car passed in the opposite direction. The whole street seemed still, as if holding its breath or sleeping off the morning. Callan didn't call. There was no apology. Not even a "where are you?" I stared out the window as we turned onto the main road. Frost still clung to the edges of roofs, and wreaths hung on every porch like promises someone else would keep. We passed the grocery store, the post office, and then the florist, where I once bought myself a birthday bouquet because they forgot. I adjusted the strap on my bag and sat back as the town slid away. Somewhere ahead, I knew they were already raising glasses. The hotel was quiet, the kind that always smelled faintly of lemon polish and stale coffee. I signed in with a steady hand, using the name I hadn't heard spoken aloud all morning, Marvena Ellsworth. The clerk smiled without looking up. I asked for a room facing away from the parking lot. I didn't want headlights sweeping across the curtains all night. I didn't want reminders of people coming or going. The room was clean enough. One bed, a desk, a small armchair by the window. I set my bag down carefully, took off my coat, and folded it over the back of the chair. Then I went downstairs to the lounge and poured myself a cup of coffee from the self-serve station. It was bitter and thin, but it was hot, and it filled my hands. Two women sat nearby, chatting softly. One of them scrolled through her phone, then nudged the other and laughed. "Listen to this," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Having dinner with my real family today. Finally, peace." She snorted. "Wow, someone's feeling bold." I looked up. The post she read came with a picture. I knew the wallpaper behind them, Callan's dining room. Callan, his wife, her parents, a few faces I didn't recognize. Everyone smiling, champagne flutes raised. The roast I taught him to make years ago, right in the center of the table. My plate, the one I had set out with care, wasn't missed. My name wasn't tagged. There was no mention that I had even existed in the plan. I was just gone, quietly erased. I sat there a few moments longer, letting the heat of the cup sink into my palms. I didn't look again at the photo. I didn't need to. Back in the room, I pulled the curtains closed and opened the folder from my bag. The documents inside were neatly labeled. Trusts, deeds, signatures in ink that had dried years ago. I traced one with my finger. They had forgotten whose name had built the house behind their smiles. The next morning, I walked down to the river behind the hotel. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp soil and cold water moving over stones. I followed the path slowly, hands in my pockets, listening to the steady rush of the current. It was the kind of sound that filled in the quiet places inside you. I tried to let my mind go blank, but old memories rose anyway. They always did when I walked near moving water. Callan was 5 when his father died. Too young to understand, too old to forget. I remembered the night after the funeral, his head pressed against my ribs as I held him in the dark, promising myself that I would keep us afloat. I didn't think of it as sacrifice then. It was simply life shifted suddenly onto my shoulders. I never remarried. Not because I didn't have the chance, but because no one seemed right for a life that was already half built around someone else. Instead, I worked double shifts at the courthouse, drank cheap coffee on the bus ride home, packed lunches at midnight so mornings could go smoother. When Callan wanted a school trip, we couldn't afford. I ironed uniforms for neighbors. When he wanted a used truck in high school, I took weekend clerical work. When his mortgage jumped unexpectedly during his second year of marriage, I wired the money before he even asked twice. I didn't resent it. Not then. Not ever. Giving felt natural, like breathing or counting change. I didn't keep track. I never asked for repayment or recognition. But walking along the riverbank now, watching the water curl around stones worn soft by time, I wondered if that was where the fissure began. If I had taught him little by little that my presence was a certainty, my help a given, my love an inexhaustible well. Maybe silence becomes permission when it lasts too long. A breeze lifted the hem of my coat as I turned back toward the hotel. Somewhere inside my room, the folder of documents waited on the desk, reminding me that I still had choices left, whether anyone remembered them or not. Back in the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet surround me. It reminded me in a way I didn't want to admit of the last time I stayed overnight at Callan's house. The memory rose without being invited, clear enough to touch. The guest room had once been mine. Not officially, of course, but in the gentle, assumed way families claim space for one another. I kept a quilt folded at the foot of the bed, deep burgundy squares stitched by hand over the course of one winter when Callan was still a boy. He used to lie under it during thunderstorms, insisting it made the house sound safer. The last time I visited, the quilt wasn't there. A pale comforter had taken its place, the kind you buy in bulk at a department store. The dresser was topped with scented candles and framed photos. I didn't recognize her mother with Callan, and the children smiling broadly, as if she'd always belonged there. My things had been moved to the hallway closet, folded too neatly for comfort. Jessica had stood in the doorway, hands clasped, voice bright. "Mom's staying with us for a few weeks, so we set up the couch for you. Hope that's okay." I'd nodded, said yes, of course, pretended it didn't sting. Sleeping on the pull-out couch wasn't terrible, but the message beneath it lingered like a watermark: no one addresses allowed. The next morning, when I offered to bring a dessert for their dinner with friends, Jessica laughed lightly. "Oh, don't worry about that. My mom already made her signature one." Her mom. The person with the guest room. The person with a labeled signature dish. I was becoming a visitor in spaces I once shaped. I hadn't argued then either. I'd simply stepped aside the way I always had, trusting they would notice if something felt uneven. But they didn't. Or maybe they did, and it suited them. Lying back on the hotel bed now, the ceiling above me blank and soft in the dim light, I realized just how many times I had absorbed these small shifts without protest, and how in the folder on the desk the final shift waited for me to claim it. I waited until the sky turned from gray to gold before I touched the envelope again. The folder had sat untouched on the desk all morning, but its weight had filled the room. It was time. I laid everything out, slowly smoothing each page flat with the edge of my hand. The deed to Callan's house was still in joint names, mine and his. A decision we made when he and Jessica bought it back when their credit wasn't strong enough to qualify a loan. I never took my name off. He never asked me to. The second set of documents listed a modest property on the coast, an inheritance from my cousin held quietly in my name. Callan didn't even know it existed. I'd planned to give it to him one day when he had children old enough to remember family vacations. He had children now, but they didn't remember me. Then came the trust. I had opened it back when Callan was in college, building it, slowly adding to it when raises came, or the tax refund was a little more generous than expected. It was meant to be a safety net for him, for his children. I hadn't touched it in years. I flipped to the last page. My name. Full control. And then the final document, the one naming me silent guarantor for Callan's small business loan. A courtesy at the time. He said it was temporary. Said they just needed help getting the paperwork through quickly. I signed without hesitation. I never asked for updates. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, heart steady, not angry, not shaking. Just clear. The kind of clear you get after staring too long at something and finally seeing it without distortion. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to a name I hadn't touched in years. Lester Ames. My late husband's closest friend. A man who understood money timing and discretion. My finger hovered over the call button for only a second before pressing it. He answered on the second ring, voice warm, steady, familiar. Marvena. I didn't pause. Lester, I need your help. It's time to make some changes. Lester didn't need the backstory. He never did. When I said it was time to make changes, he just cleared his throat and said, "All right then, let's get to work." He had always been like that. Measured, precise, never theatrical. My late husband trusted him with everything, and in the years since I had come to rely on that quiet steadiness more than I realized. We started with the company. Callan's business loan had my name as silent guarantor. Lester filed the necessary paperwork to dissolve that agreement, effective immediately. I no longer wanted to be the unseen hand holding up something I was no longer welcome inside. Next was the trust. It had been structured with shared access. Callan could dip into it for business, for emergencies, for whatever he felt he needed. I'd never questioned the withdrawals. I'd trusted the intention behind them, but I hadn't looked in years. Now Lester ensured the account was restructured. Full control shifted back to me. No more quiet siphoning. No more silent approval. The third item took a little longer. The coastal property had been under a soft agreement, a future gift never written, only understood by me. I had left it untouched for years, imagining family holidays that never came. Lester filed the documents to move it into a private holding under my name alone. No forwarding address. No notice required. By the time the sun had dipped below the horizon, everything was set in motion. There had been no arguments, no texts, no explanations. Just a woman, a folder, and a decision made quietly after years of waiting for someone else to notice what she carried. I didn't message Callan. I didn't write a note or drop hints. I didn't leave breadcrumbs to lead anyone to where I was or what I'd done. I closed the folder and slipped it back into my bag. The room felt different, now lighter, like something had been lifted that I hadn't known was pressing down. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. I stood at the window and watched the glow settle gently over the sidewalk, knowing the next step wouldn't come with noise. It would come with stillness. 2 days passed before the phone finally rang. I saw Callan's name light up the screen and let it ring twice before answering. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology either. I just wanted to hear how he would begin. Mom. His voice had that familiar, careful tone. Just checking in. Haven't heard from you. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at the overcast sky beyond the window. I figured you were with your real family, I said. Steady and quiet. There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. Don't be like that. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch not to punish him, but to let the weight of it settle where it needed to. He cleared his throat. The kids missed you. Did they? I asked, not accusing, just curious. They asked about you when we opened presents. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. That's kind of them. I didn't mention the trust. I didn't bring up the loan paperwork or the beach house. I didn't list the things I'd done or the reasons I'd done them. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't revenge. It was just done. He kept the conversation light, asked about the weather if I'd gotten his gift in the mail. I hadn't. Maybe he hadn't sent it. Maybe he didn't know what to send. After a few more strained pleasantries, he hesitated again. Well, just wanted to check in. Let me know when you're heading home. I exhaled slowly. Take care of yourself, Callan. There was a pause on the line. Then a soft, yeah, you too, Mom. When the call ended, I didn't feel emptiness. I felt clarity, a kind I hadn't touched in years. I set the phone down, folded a sweater into my suitcase, and turned toward the window. Outside, the clouds shifted light, pushing through in thin streaks. I let it fill the room a moment before I reached for the letter I'd been writing. Somewhere between the second and third wave of the morning, while I sat in a little cafe near the boardwalk in Seaside, Callan finally noticed. The trust account flagged a change, access revoked, permissions updated. His accountant called him confused by the updates. The business account now showed my name as removed. No silent guarantor. No fallback. Callan sent a text around noon. Mom, did something happen with the accounts? Is this a mistake? I saw it flash across my screen. I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit there like a dish left out after dinner, something he could clear or ignore, but not unsee. Outside, the tide crept higher, licking the base of the pier. The sky was pale, wide, and soft, as if it had forgotten how to carry weight. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the heat fill the quiet space inside me. This was the place Callan had once called dull. There's nothing to do out there, he said. Too quiet. No shops. No nightlife. He preferred the flash of the city, the comfort of places with fast service and loud menus. But here there was time. Space. The sound of waves replacing the need for conversation. I didn't feel erased here. I didn't feel scheduled in or pushed out. I just felt present. At the next table, a couple debated whether to order pie. She wanted peach. He voted for apple. They laughed when they couldn't decide. It was the kind of small joy I used to think had to be earned. Now I saw it simply happened for people who gave themselves room to feel it. I looked out the window again. The water had reached the rocks now, climbing gently, pulling and releasing like breath. I finished my tea and tucked the unopened text back into my pocket. It could wait. Everything that mattered was already done. Back in the hotel, the letter I'd started was still resting on the desk. I picked it up, read the last line I'd written, and continued. New Year's Eve arrived without fanfare. No fireworks, no clinking glasses, no scattered pine needles on the floor. Just the hush of waves and the slow rhythm of my own steps along the shoreline. I had rented a small apartment above a used bookstore, just one room, a kitchenette, and a window that faced the sea. The walls smelled faintly of old paper and salt. The shop below closed early that day, and I spent the afternoon unpacking a few groceries, brewing tea, and watching the sky dim. There was no tree, no garland, no lights blinking in rhythm with artificial cheer, and yet something in me felt brighter than it had in years. I could breathe again. Not just inhale and exhale, but breathe without holding part of myself back. I sat by the window with the letter I'd been writing, reading it over one more time. It wasn't a farewell. It wasn't dramatic. Just a clear telling of how things had been and how they no longer needed to be. As the tide came in, my phone lit up once more on the windowsill. Will you ever come back? There was no name on the screen, just the question. I looked at it for a long time, not out of hesitation, but reflection. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the woman who might have rushed to explain to soften the blow to make someone else feel better. That woman no longer lived in this room. I didn't reply. I closed the phone gently and left it on the windowsill beside the mug of cooling tea and the small stone I'd picked up on my walk. Smooth, worn something that had survived the tide again and again. Outside, someone lit a sparkler in the distance. I could hear the faint pop, see the flicker beyond the dunes. I stayed inside. The night didn't need to be loud to be real. It only needed to be mine.